Revenge with Karen.
I heard you were still here, she said, like I was a rat clinging to the hull of a sinking ship. Natalie, eyebrows perfectly microbladed, voice dipped in botoxed condescension, walked into the Monday morning strategy call wearing a $900 blazer like it came free with her last betrayal. I didn't stand, just sipped my bitter coffee and nodded. The last time I saw her, she was whispering to my ex at a product launch party, laughing too hard at his jokes and touching his arm like she already owned everything I'd built. Turns out she'd do just that. But before all that, I was the spine of this company. Not the face, not the visionary, just the person who made sure things actually worked. 3 product pivots, 2 emergency overhauls, and 1 absolute debacle with a GDPR compliance crash that nearly tanked us was the one cleaning up in the dark while execs took credit in the spotlight. I architected the deployment framework, built redundancies nobody thanked me for, stayed late, answered Slack at 2 a.m. from a rest stop in the middle of Ohio with 1 bar of signal and a busted hotspot. Because when you're the last line of defense between your company and a failed release, there's no such thing as off hours. And yet, when I got the email about the leadership transition, I felt the bile rise. Not because I feared change, I was change. I managed chaos, but because I saw the name at the bottom, Natalie Greer, my ex's consulting partner, now promoted from whispering pillow talk into his ear to whispering strategic vision into the boardroom. She came in all charm and champagne, used the word synergy 5 times in her first 30 minutes, and told the team she was here to support, not dismantle. Her teeth were too white, compliments too smooth, like she'd practiced them in the mirror alongside her corporate knife skills. And while the engineers tried to pretend everything was normal, I watched the old leadership team start disappearing like candles in a blackout. Marketing lead transitioned out. VP of Ops decided to pursue new opportunities. The old CTO, gone before his mug could cool on his desk. But I stayed. I stayed because Natalie didn't know what I built. She thought the deployment system was just Jenkins and Git, and a few pipelines someone could hand off like a stapler. What she didn't know, what most people never care to know, was that the final mile of that pipeline had a lock. Not a bug, not a patchwork kludge, but a deliberate choke point. The last phase of a release couldn't go through unless a specific admin flag was triggered. Not because I was power hungry, but because I'd seen too many slapdash hotfixes go live at midnight with broken configs that cost us contracts and dignity. It wasn't sabotage. It was safety. One last hand on the wheel before launch. And I was the only one who had the key. Natalie didn't ask me about it. She asked me about the interface. She wanted visual dashboards and client-facing metrics, and all the things that make VCs clap, but don't mean shit when a deployment fails at 99%. She smiled through her teeth and called me a legacy guardian during an all-hands. Like I was the haunted grandfather clock in the corner of a house she'd just bought and couldn't wait to tear down. I smiled back, didn't argue, didn't explain, but I started backing up my files. Quietly cleaned my laptop, made sure the auto-cleanup scripts I'd written years ago were ready to go. Not to delete anything, but to remove myself with surgical precision. No lingering access logs, no unrevoked privileges, just one account, the admin override, stored on an encrypted drive I kept offsite. The same day HR sent out the vague email about possible restructuring initiatives, I updated the README file on our backend documentation. No threats, no shade, just a simple line at the bottom. Final deployment approval requires admin override. See System Charter, Clause 9b. Natalie never read it. I know this because she never asked. And I waited, polite, professional, smiling through town halls where she blathered about disruption and leaning in. Meanwhile, I watched her slowly cut away the people who knew how things worked and replace them with shiny new hires who spoke fluent jargon, but couldn't troubleshoot their way out of a password reset. Still, I did my job. I attended my final one-on-one with her and nodded when she said she respected my contributions. She said it like I was already dead, told me she wanted to reimagine team dynamics, that there'd be changes, but everyone has a place in the new vision. At night, I had a drink. One drink. Neat. Then I zipped up my laptop, labeled a manila folder with transition notes, and slid a small USB drive into my purse, just in case. Some people hoard receipts. I build kill switches. They served pastries at the firing. little silver tongs and croissants arranged like corpses in a crime scene. Natalie stood at the head of the glass conference room like she was about to announce the winner of a sweepstakes, not gut the soul of the company. Her voice had that Stepford chill to it, smile turned up, eyes dead behind the buttocks. "Before we begin," she said, tapping her manicured nails against the edge of the lucite table, "I want to thank everyone for your hard work during this exciting period of transformation." Transformation. That's what they call it now. Not a coup, not a purge, just transformation. Like we're all caterpillars cheerfully dissolving into goo. I already knew. Moment my invite said executive strategy refresh, and not leadership sync like it had for the last 4 quarters, I knew. And when the meeting time overlapped with our deployment review, I really knew. You don't move a meeting like that unless you're either about to close a deal or close someone out. Still, I showed up. Hair tied back. Black blazer. The one I wore when we closed our first Series A. My badge still scanned green. I could feel the door judging me on the way in. I took my seat and nodded at the CFO, who gave me the same tight, pitying smile you'd give a dog before the vet visit. No one made eye contact. Not really, except Natalie. She looked right at me when she spoke. "As part of our evolving leadership model," she said, clicking the little remote in her hand, "we'll be sunsetting some legacy roles to make space for a more dynamic operational structure." Sunsetting. She made it sound like I was a screensaver. Then came the slide. My title, my name, and the words, "Role consolidated effective immediately." And that's when she said it. "Your services are no longer needed," with a smile, like she was handing me a participation ribbon for surviving my own execution. I didn't flinch, not once. I kept my spine straight, my face still. Natalie held the silence, waiting for a reaction. The room did too, every board member blinking slowly like they weren't sure if clapping was appropriate. Then the CFO started. 2 slow, awkward claps. The rest followed like they'd just been told they had to. That's when I knew no one was coming for me. No one was going to object. No one was going to say, "Wait, she built this place." Not even a throat clear, just soft applause and the faint rustle of ego preservation. I stood, adjusted the lapels of my blazer, took a sip of coffee, burned my tongue but didn't let it show. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, voice flat but measured. "It's been enlightening." Natalie tilted her head. "We'll have HR coordinate your transition out." "Of course," I said. "Just need to grab my things." The room buzzed again, meaningless filler talk to smother the discomfort. But Natalie kept watching me like a hawk with lip filler. I gave her nothing, not one crack. I walked out calm, straight to my desk. My name had already been removed from the Slack org chart. Subtle, efficient. I packed slowly, mug, charger, notepad with the post-it from that time we shipped early and the client sent cupcakes. I didn't touch my work laptop. That wasn't the point. In the bottom drawer under a tangle of old badge lanyards and half-dead pens was the thing that was the point. A slim black USB drive, labeled in Sharpie housekeeping. Encrypted, clean, surgical, not malicious, not even secret, just preparation. I slid it into my purse without a word. On my way out, I passed the product team, heads down, focused on the next release. They barely looked up. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they did and said nothing. Back at the elevator, I glanced once over my shoulder. Natalie was still in the conference room, leaning back like she'd just won a hand of poker and was waiting for someone to top it. She thought this was checkmate. I hit the button. The elevator doors slid shut. I whispered, not loud, just enough for me, "Some services can't be replaced." And that little silver drive in my bag, that was the key to the part of the system no one else remembered existed. But they would. Very, very soon. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of my server rack and the occasional creak of the radiator that never fully shut off. I kicked off my heels, tossed the blazer over a chair, sat down at the desk I'd built years ago, oak, chipped at the corners, sturdy like I used to feel. My personal laptop flickered to life, a fingerprint scan away from everything they thought they deleted me from. I hadn't touched the system's core documentation in months, not since the last product pivot that gave half the execs vertigo. But muscle memory kicked in. Folder after folder opened, pipeline scripts, deployment logic trees, admin flows. Nothing flashy, just the kind of elegant, invisible work that keeps things from collapsing in on themselves. At the heart of it sat the protocol I'd written during a particularly bad week. 2 production rollbacks, 1 angry client, and a junior dev who pushed a broken build straight to live. The final lock. Back then, I called it my sane switch. a way to stop disasters before they launched themselves into the world wearing our logo. To most, looked like just another step in the process, harmless. But the reality was simple. If that lock wasn't manually triggered by someone with the right admin override, the deployment froze at 99%. No crash, no error message, just a polite refusal to proceed. A red light at the end of a runway no one else could see. Natalie never asked about it. She gave interviews, talked about product velocity and vertical integration, but more time with PR than engineering. She cared about outcomes, not architecture. And that blind spot, that was her real failure, not the smug cruelty, not the boardroom theatrics. It was not knowing what she didn't know. I stared at the lines of code on my screen. My initials still lingered in the commit history. No one had touched this part in over 6 months. Good. I opened my resignation clearance checklist, standard protocol for offboarding senior tech staff. Deactivate credentials. Revoke API keys. Wipe VPN tokens. I followed every step meticulously, like I was preparing my own autopsy. First, I confirmed HR had already suspended my SSO access. Sloppy. Then I pulled up the admin shell for the deployment framework and walked myself out the door, digitally speaking. Admin token revoked. Jenkins role escalation removed. Server-side SSH disabled. I swept my tracks clean with the precision of a surgeon who's tired of seeing their work botched by amateurs. All except for one thing, the override key. Years ago, I'd built a separate credential. Hidden behind layers of logging obfuscation, it didn't show up in the normal admin list. It wasn't in the credential vault either. It wasn't even on the company network. It was local. Mine. That key couldn't create anything. Couldn't push builds. Couldn't edit repos. It could only do one thing, unlock the final step in the deployment, like the last twist of a submarine hatch. Useless unless someone tried to launch without me. I tested it, just once. Plugged in the USB, ran the auth script and waited. Authenticated. Admin override active final deployment. Locked until sign-off. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Not relief. Not joy. Just a quiet confirmation that I hadn't imagined all of this. That I had seen the storm coming a year ago and built the shelter before the rain started. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't taking anything from them. I was just no longer giving, letting the system follow the rules I wrote when I still believed in consequences. They'd think it was a glitch, a hiccup in the CI/CD pipeline. Some YAML file misaligned or a token expired in the wrong region. Scramble, patch, reroute. The system wouldn't budge. Because at the end of every process was a question written in plain human language, "Are you sure?" And without my key, the system would stay locked, quiet, compliant, patient, just like me. The first hiccup showed up on a Tuesday. A ticket popped into the public dev channel with the subject line, "Final deployment stalled, approval loop stuck." They didn't ping me, they couldn't. It was already scrubbed from the org chart like a dead goldfish flushed and forgotten. But I still had friends on the inside. People who knew how to speak without speaking. One forwarded me a screenshot. Build 8.4.1. Deployment progress, 99%, stalled, awaiting admin override. They thought it was a timeout issue, maybe a permissions cascade or a bad merge. Standard troubleshooting began, rollback to 8.4.0, flush the pipelines, reauthorize credentials. But the lock was patient, indifferent. It didn't care how many times they rebooted the process, because it wasn't a malfunction. It was a rule, and Natalie had never learned the rules. She was still busy pretending everything was fine, scheduling fireside chats with LinkedIn influencers, and fluffing out her vision for scalable culture in glossy blog posts. One of them quoted her calling the product deployment ready. I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on my keyboard. Deployment ready, huh? Tell that to Jenkins. By Thursday, they were rerouting, trying to clone the environment onto a sandbox server, hoping to bypass the production flags. But the system wasn't dumb. The lock didn't care where you moved it. If the override wasn't triggered, it just watched. Quiet, polite, like a doorman who won't open the gate without seeing your ID. Natalie still hadn't caught on. It was too far above the code. She thought engineering was a vending machine. Push a button, get results. But now the buttons were sticking, and no one could figure out why the Snickers weren't dropping. The demo date loomed. A major logistics firm was flying in for a full system walkthrough, end-to-end functionality, live deployment, real-time analytics. That deal would secure the next 2 quarters. Maybe 3. if it went sideways. Board would start asking questions she couldn't answer with a slide deck and a pearly grin. Another friend sent me an internal memo. Subject line, escalating final stage auth failures. Engineers were now pulling apart backend logs, looking for inconsistencies. They ran script diff comparisons, even tried reinstalling the approval flow modules, but nothing worked. The lockout wasn't in the new code. It was old, rooted deep. Decision made by someone who'd seen the crash before the wreckage. Someone who'd been quietly erased. I kept sipping my coffee. From a distance, it looked like any other launch scramble. Devs whispering about build inconsistencies, QA teams scrambling to reproduce bugs they couldn't isolate, product managers starting to sweat through their polos. But under it all, I saw it happening. The quiet unraveling. A ship drifting without its ballast. Still, Natalie pressed forward, posted on social like everything was peaky. Excited to demo our upcoming release to partners next week. With a carefully curated photo of her in front of the war room whiteboard, I zoomed in. Her scribbles didn't mention the lock, didn't mention the override, because she didn't know, or worse, she still believed it would fix itself. No one called me, no one dared, not yet. To them, I was gone. Dust in the ventilation system. A former resource. Slack channels no longer pinged my handle. But I watched the repo commit stall. I watched their stand-up notes get shorter, more desperate. Still, I stayed silent, not smug, not gloating, just steady. There's a kind of quiet power in being the ghost in the machine, not haunting, just reminding the living of the structure they stand on. And knowing, eventually, they'd hit a wall they couldn't charm their way through. Subject line hit my inbox at 10:03 p.m. Quick sync opportunity. Natalie never called it what it was. She couldn't. That would mean admitting the system she steamrolled over still had teeth. That the person she exiled held the last matchbox in a room full of frayed wires. No, she had to package it in a palatable little euphemism. A quick sync. As if we were going to hop on a cheery Zoom call and realign on objectives over kombucha and toxic denial. Message was short, performatively breezy. Hey, hope you're enjoying your time off. We're encountering some minor hiccups in the legacy deployment chain and would love your input as a short-term advisor. Just a light touch to help us clean up some older logic. Let me know if you're open to a quick catch-up. I stared at it for a full minute, sipping from a wine glass I hadn't washed in 3 days. The word legacy practically burned a hole in the screen. It was the same word she used when gutting the last CTO. Legacy systems, legacy thinking, legacy people. Now she wanted the legacy ghost to fix her mess without calling it what it was. I clicked reply, typed 2 sentences, appreciate the outreach. I don't think I'm the right cultural fit for the current direction of the company. Then I hit send and booked a direct flight to Tucson. Midday departure, window seat, no laptop. Just a paperback, a wide-brimmed hat, a charger for my phone in case I felt the urge to watch the fire from afar. Back inside the company, things were fracturing. One of the engineers, Kevin, a nervous talent who'd once thanked me for saving his weekend by catching a bad deployment, posted a screenshot in the dev chat. It showed the build stalled again, same spot, same quiet red light. Final deployment, awaiting admin override. Someone asked who was supposed to approve it. Kevin replied, old logic says this needed override from initials redacted. Does that still exist? Silence. Then, did we remove that when we sunset the old framework? No one responded. Natalie didn't reply publicly. She couldn't. Not without admitting she'd nuked the one person who actually knew how the car worked before taking it on a joyride in front of investors. But the cracks were widening. My phone buzzed again 2 days later. A number I didn't recognize. Let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds of heavy breathing, then Natalie's voice, strained, soft, like she was speaking from under a desk. Hey, I just wanted to clarify the ask in case the email didn't come across right. It's really minimal. Maybe an hour or 2. We can compensate, of course. We really want to hit this demo window, and it seems like the system's just missing something. Anyway, hope Arizona's treating you well. She hung up without saying goodbye. Arizona was treating me well. The desert has a way of drying you out, baking off the petness until only the bones remain. I walked the red rocks with no signal, let my skin burn a little, let the silence sink in. Not the kind of silence you get from being ignored, the kind you choose. I knew they'd keep trying. They'd spin their wheels, blame Jenkins, blame the cloud provider, probably even gaslight each other into thinking someone had deleted a variable. But they couldn't fake their way past the lock. Not unless they tore down the entire infrastructure and rebuilt it from scratch, and that would take months. Money, answers they didn't want to give the board. And the board still didn't know. That was the real ticking clock. Once the client demo failed, and it would, Natalie would have to come clean or spin harder. Maybe both. Engineers had already started whispering, wondering why her fixes didn't fix anything, why nothing shipped, why all the lights were green except the one that actually meant go. Meanwhile, I swam in the hotel pool under a pale desert moon. Let them scramble, let her squirm. I'd written the system to be safe. I never imagined it would become a trap. But that's the thing about boundaries. When the right people respect them, they keep chaos out. When the wrong ones barge in, become the walls that keep them locked inside. The war room lights burned fluorescent until 2 a.m. every night that week. From my hotel balcony in Arizona, I watched the moon rise like a pale, bored eye while the company I built bled quietly under Natalie's leadership. The kind of bleeding you don't notice at first. Just sluggish limbs, dry mouth, a vague dizziness. Until you look down and realize your hands are covered in your own mistakes. The lead client, whale in the logistics world, old money cautious, had scheduled a full walkthrough of the platform. A pre-partnership validation, they called it. But we all knew what it was, a final inspection before the ink dried on a multi-million-dollar contract. They wanted proof of stability, scalability, deployment in real time. Natalie, of course, promised the world. Locked and loaded, she told them over Zoom, wearing that same blazer I swear she sleeps in, excited to showcase just how turnkey our system really is. Turnkey, God, the irony. Meanwhile, inside engineering, the wheels were coming off. The product had passed every automated test. Staging looked fine, analytics purring like a kitten on Adderall. But when they hit the final button to push live, nothing. No crash, no error code, just a polite red prompt that said, awaiting admin override. Again. By now, the team had cycled through every fix they knew. Containers, reset tokens, branch pruning. They even tried restoring a 6-week-old snapshot of the environment just to see if it had been corrupted downstream. Same result. The deployment system refused to budge. Natalie, still pretending it was a minor pipeline latency issue, had started ducking stand-ups. Her presence became ghost-like, popping into Slack with vague cheerleading and disappearing before the hard questions landed. Most common phrase was looping back later. But the engineers were cracking. Half of them were sleeping under their desks. The others were whispering theories in the private repo threads. A few suspected a permissions misfire. One suggested a rogue lock inherited from an old build, but no one could find the actual trigger. Then a junior dev named Mateo, bright kid, still wore hoodies with anime patches, dug up an archived internal doc I'd written nearly a year ago. File wasn't flashy. Just a PDF titled Deployment Security Final Phase V4. Buried on page 6, under a bullet list of exceptions and environment variables, was a single line, Final deployment requires admin override. Contact, my initials. He posted it to the engineering thread at 1:14 a.m. The channel went dead for 7 minutes. Then Kevin, the same Kevin who used to bring donuts to Friday stand-ups, replied, "Did anyone tell Natalie this?" No one answered, because how could they? To admit it now would mean admitting they'd erased the one person who understood how the system actually worked. The person who wasn't just pushing buttons, but had welded the control panel together with spit, duct tape, and late-night desperation. In that moment, Natalie wasn't just facing a failed demo, was facing the structural reality that no amount of pitch deck confidence or LinkedIn buzzwords could brute force through a safeguard built on experience, not ambition. They could have called me. The override key wasn't hidden maliciously. It was documented, approved by the old CTO, implemented after a near-catastrophic release. But Natalie had swept the past like it was cobwebs, and now she was choking on the dust. I poured another drink, kept reading the Slack thread, which had now splintered into a frenzy of screenshots, wild theories, and polite frustration starting to crack at the edges. One message stood out, Kevin again. Is there any record of override credentials outside the legacy chain? Translation, did we ever back up the person we just fired? Spoiler, they didn't. The lock was holding. The engineers were spinning. The client demo was 36 hours away. And Natalie, she hadn't sent another message. No new emails, no voice memos. Just digital silence, the kind you only hear when someone's finally realized they're standing in a room they lit on fire. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. But I did close my laptop with the same care you give to a weapon after it's done its job. The lock wasn't vengeance, it was a boundary. And boundaries only become punishment when you try to walk through them without permission. The building looked smaller. It always does, after they bury you in it and you come back from the dead. Same frosted glass. Same overwatered ficus drooping in the corner. But the moment I stepped through the front doors and the security guy, Mark, still chewing that same nicotine gum, handed me a guest badge, the air shifted. Not hostile, not friendly, just reverent. Like the ghost they'd all ignored had decided to manifest again, in broad daylight, holding a coffee mug that read, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." The board had insisted, not suggested, not looped in, insisted. The client walkthrough was in less than 24 hours, and no one could deploy past the lock. The engineers had exhausted every failsafe. Natalie had burned through every excuse. And the final straw was a single question during the prep meeting. If no one can launch the product, what are we selling tomorrow? It landed like a gut punch. CFO choked on his LaCroix. Natalie muttered something about unexpected legacy constraints, but it was too late. The room turned cold. They told her to fix it. Not with hustle, not with optimism, with competence. And that meant calling me. She didn't greet me when I arrived, just nodded from across the strategy room table like we were cordial neighbors who once shared a fence, and now pretended not to hear each other's arguments at night. I walked in calm, no entourage, no performative swagger. Just my bag, my mug, and a folder labeled System Continuity Final Phase. I sat, didn't speak first. Didn't need to. The room was crowded, board reps, engineering leads, someone from legal pretending not to take notes. The projector screen showed the familiar deployment status dashboard. Green, 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 then red. Always red. 99% halted, admin override required. Natalie cleared her throat. We appreciate you joining us on short notice. We just need a little clarity around the admin parameters in the older deployment structure. Her voice was flat, polite, controlled, but her eyes flicked between me and the screen like she was waiting for a wire to snap. I took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down with a soft clink. Let's review the admin privileges for the final lock, I said. Calm, direct, like a professor walking into the last lecture of the semester. No one interrupted. I pulled out my printout, showed them the float chart, black and white, nothing fancy. The old CTO's signature in the bottom corner, dated 18 months ago. Highlighted in yellow, final deployment requires manual confirmation by credentialed override. Per Charter Clause 9b, I continued. This was put in place after the 7.3 regression release nearly cost us a European contract. It was approved, tested, and documented across multiple quarters. Nothing about it is hidden or proprietary. It's just secure. Someone from the board leaned forward. Is it active in the current pipeline? Yes. Can it be bypassed? Not without deactivating core validation checks. And if you try that, I glanced at the engineering lead. System will fail safe and suspend the environment for 36 hours. Whispers. Natalie pretended to nod thoughtfully. We were just unclear on where that credential lived now. I let that hang in the air for a beat too long. Then, it lives off-network, as designed, to prevent unauthorized pushes before critical milestones. The legal rep scribbled something fast. The CFO shifted like his seat had grown spikes. Natalie's face had gone still. Her fingers were tapping a slow rhythm under the table. She looked at me once, just once, and I saw it. The fear. Not that she'd be exposed, not that she'd lose face, but that she'd underestimated something she thought she'd buried. And now it was standing across from her, composed, holding the keys. I didn't offer to fix it. I didn't promise magic. I just let them sit in it. Let them taste the cost of ignoring the boring people who build the bones. Tomorrow, I said, standing slowly, you'll need someone with the correct credentials in the room. The lock isn't a bug, it's policy. And then, for the first time all day, Natalie spoke with something approaching real emotion. So you're saying it's not broken? I looked her straight in the eye. It's working exactly as intended. And I walked out. No mic drop, no smug smirk, just poise. Because the only thing louder than revenge is restraint with a witness. Natalie was in peak form, voice lacquered with charm, teeth like polished veneers on a shipwreck. She stood at the front of the room in her perfect blazer, pitching the product like it had practically coded itself out of sheer ambition. What we've built here, she cooed, isn't just scalable, it's inevitable. The client reps, 3 stoic men from a billion-dollar logistics firm, nodded, tight-lipped. No smiles. They were here for proof, not poetry. The demo environment glowed on the oversized screen behind her, system analytics pulsing, real-time dashboards dancing with data. Everything carefully preloaded, massaged, staged to look alive. But they didn't want to show. They wanted to push the button. Natalie gave the signal to Kevin, who sat at the side terminal looking like someone had vacuumed the blood from his face. His hands hovered over the keyboard like a man defusing a bomb, and then, with no other choice, he clicked deploy. And just like that, 99%. Red light. Waiting admin override. It didn't crash, didn't sputter, just stopped, still, like a held breath in a coffin. Natalie kept talking for a beat too long, hoping no one noticed. She chuckled, pointed at the screen like it was part of the presentation. Ah, yes, this is our final deployment staging. Just one last click and Kevin cleared his throat. Sorry to interrupt. She froze. He looked up from the terminal, face pale. The system's still locked. Need admin sign-off to proceed. Silence. The client lead, a tall man in a dark suit with the exact expression of someone who has destroyed weaker companies before lunch, leaned forward. You said this was already deployed. Natalie tried to recover. Yes, of course, this is a minor, leftover configuration from an earlier build. Nothing critical. We'll resolve it immediately. Then why are we still looking at a lock screen? He asked. She didn't answer. Couldn't, because every eye in the room had already turned to me. I was seated at the far end of the table. No introduction, no title, just a consultant on paper and a specter in truth. I stood slowly, calm, no rush. My footsteps echoed louder than her entire pitch had. I approached the terminal. Kevin slid aside without a word. I didn't look at Natalie. I didn't need to. Her silence was already thunder. I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB, slid it in like a final chess piece. The terminal blinked once, then opened the override console. I typed a single phrase, 8 characters, no drama, and hit enter. Deployment unlocked. The screen turned green. The analytics began to stream. The platform came alive, real-time, orders simulated, latency benchmarked. Everything moving exactly as promised, only now, finally real. The room exhaled. The client reps leaned in, murmuring approval. Natalie didn't move. She was still standing where the pitch had died, hands frozen mid-gesture, mouth slightly open. Her face had drained of all color, like the truth had ripped out her spine and left her propped up like a doll that forgot how to lie. I said nothing, didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't even turn to her. Just unplugged the USB, slipped it back in my bag, and returned to my seat without a sound. Absolute power doesn't announce itself. It just enters, rights the room, and leaves behind a silence no speech can recover from. The board met in one of those soundproof glass rooms that always look like aquariums for very expensive regrets. From where I sat in the outer lounge, sipping a lukewarm espresso and watching the cactus in the corner slowly die, I could see everything. Natalie was already inside, seated alone on one side of the long table, her hair a little less perfect than usual, voice muted by layers of insulation and consequence. The door closed behind her, but I didn't need to hear what they said. The body language told all. The head of legal was already flipping through a thick binder of system policies, annotated with post-its and tabs. The CFO looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. The board chair, a woman with ice in her posture and blood in her eyes, leaned forward, tapped a single paragraph, and waited. Natalie's lips moved. Hands fluttered once, then stopped. Then she stared at the table like she was trying to disappear into it. Found it. Clause 9b, buried in the system charter. Final deployment requires manual credential override. Must remain in place for compliance with ISO 27001 rollback protocol. Signed by the prior CTO. And countersigned, in digital ink, by Natalie herself on her very first week. It waved it through during her blitz to streamline legacy workflows. Hadn't read it, hadn't understood it. She thought it was just some leftover bureaucratic molasses. Turns out, it was the only thing keeping the product from launching itself into disaster. Natalie had wanted sleek, easy, fast, but she forgot that systems built to last don't care about tempo, they care about trust. The door opened 20 minutes later. Natalie walked out first. Her eyes flicked past me like I was furniture. Or a loaded gun left on a table no one wanted to claim. She didn't speak. The board chair stepped out next, paused, then turned to me. Thank you, she said. I nodded. We'd like to extend a formal offer. Transition consultant, total autonomy. Come in when you want, leave when you like. No direct reports, just be available, in case something like this ever happens again. I didn't ask what they planned to do with Natalie. That wasn't my business, not anymore. I stood, smoothed the sleeve of my jacket, and smiled. Appreciate it, I said. But no, she tilted her head, not insulted, just curious. No, I think the system's working exactly as intended. No anger, no triumph, just stillness. She watched me for a second longer, then nodded, almost respectfully. I walked out the front doors without looking back. The sun hit my face, warm, uncomplicated, in my bag. USB drive rested in its cloth sleeve. I didn't need it anymore. The lock had done its job, not as a trap, not as revenge, just a simple boundary. A line in the code that said, "Think before you push." I stopped at the curb, flagged a ride, and watched the building shrink in the mirror as we pulled away. Some doors stay shut for a reason, but if you build the lock yourself, you always know where the key is. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.